When Luka Doncic went beast mode and obliterated the Minnesota Timberwolves in a Game 5 elimination game on the Wolves' home court, putting them away in convincing fashion on the way to his first finals appearance, Luka had put the league on notice that he had arrived. And if we saw anything like that type of performance in the conference finals series, the Mavs would be primed to win their first title since 2011. I praise Luka Doncic for putting on one of the most dominant playoff performances we have seen in nearly a decade, and that this final series against the Boston Celtics was going to be all about him. The rise of Luka, taking that final step and getting over the hump and becoming an NBA champion. The Dallas Mavericks in 6 is what I had called, as I believe Dallas had by far and away the best player in the series that would give them the edge to win it all. Now, I've never been good when it comes to making series predictions or just predictions in general, but I don't think most of us would have predicted that Dallas would have gotten beaten down in the manner they did against the Celtics in this series, and to have Luka Doncic, of all players, to be one of the biggest reasons for their demise. One of the greatest players in the game of basketball, a player who without him the Mavericks wouldn't have even come close to reaching the finals, but would end up becoming the team's biggest downfall on the biggest stage. And while Luka will still remain one of the top players in the league and a masterful offensive player, there is one thing that Luka has to fix and address if he ever wants to get to that next level in winning an NBA championship and cementing his legacy as one of the greatest players of all time. What is that, you ask? Well, let's talk about it. As always, if you're new to the channel and you like this type of content, then be sure to subscribe to help the channel grow, and in return, I'll be providing more NBA content like this. Now, I hate doing this because I know as fans of the game, media outlets, content creators, what have you, the discourse around the NBA has become so toxic, and we tend to focus on what a player does wrong versus what they do well. And while we should be focusing more on the Celtics and how great they were in this series and landing their 18th championship as a franchise, and I will do a video on their title run and speak to some of it here, I do feel that it is important to discuss that despite the incredible talent that is Luka Doncic, just how much this series exposed some of his biggest weaknesses and the things that are setting him apart from being one of the greatest superstars to ever play the game. Of course, everyone has seen by now the viral video on Brian Windhorst going in on Luka Doncic after their loss in Game 3, specifically calling out Luka's poor effort on defense or lack thereof, also making poor decisions on that end of the floor that got him in foul trouble, and focusing more on complaining to the refs than getting back on defense in transition. And look, I don't necessarily agree with everything Windhorst said there, and I don't think it's fair to really put all of the blame on Luka for the Mavs' poor final showing, because let's be honest, a lot of Mavs players didn't show up well, namely their role guys who have played so well throughout the playoffs, like Daniel Gafford, Derrick Jones Jr., and PJ Washington, and of course Kyrie Irving, who went MIA in games 1 and 2 and was really bad in a closeout Game 5. And yes, I don't think we can minimize the point on how poorly Luka's co-stars showed up in this series. Luka was doing everything he could to will this team to a victory in those first 2 games in Boston. So to simply go all in on Luka and chalk it up to his poor defense as the reason for the Mavericks losing the series is a bit disingenuous. And look, we all know Luka is not a good defensive player. He's never been good on that end of the floor since he first came into the NBA. But Luka's defense and effort on that side of the ball was absolutely atrocious in this finals. Like, there's a difference between being a mediocre or below average defender and straight up not giving a shit on that end of the floor. Not everybody in the league is going to be a defensive savant. Hell, most players in the NBA today aren't great on defense because of the league's hyper focus on offensive efficiency. But even for those that maybe don't possess the skills or the footwork to stay in front of their man without fouling, or don't have the speed and strength to get through screens, or maybe they don't have the IQ and situational awareness to know when to provide help defense in playing off the ball, but at least they try. For the most part, they give effort on the defensive end. Might not always look pretty, and they might still get beat off the dribble or miss an assignment or help side defense. They at least try, though. They at least try to be more than just a traffic cone on the floor. Luka's effort on defense in this series, with the exception to an extent on Game 4, but watching him on that side of the ball was almost like he thought he was too good to play defense. Not important, I'm the star of this team, I'm the new face of the league, I don't need to play defense. That's for role players, not me. Obviously, he didn't say that, but that was my impression I got from Luka in this series based on his body language, based on how much he complained every time he thought he was fouled or committed a foul, that, hey, I'm the superstar. I should be getting the superstar calls. And that I need to save my energy on offense. You guys put the work in on D. Like, it doesn't work that way, my guy. This is the NBA Finals. This is the last step to getting that ring. This is what every team plays for and only so few are able to get to. You're right there It doesn't matter where your skills lie. It doesn't matter what happened throughout the season or even in the earlier parts of the playoffs. It doesn't matter how dominant you were in the conference finals. You have to come ready to play in every facet of the game when you're at the biggest stage, not only for yourself, but for your teammates as well. When you give zero effort on defense, how do you expect your teammates to respond to that? Why should they go extra hard on that end when they know their efforts are going to be futile, knowing teams are just going to be going right at you to score? And for those saying I'm just exaggerating on Luka's poor defense, well, how about some numbers to illustrate this point? The highest blow-by percentage allowed in any playoff series among any player in the NBA over the last decade was by Luka Doncic in this final series against the Boston Celtics at 67.7%. He allowed his man to drive by him, beat him off the dribble on the way to the basket nearly 70% of the time on all drives in the NBA Finals. Oh, and don't mind that Luka also holds the second and third highest blow-by percentage allowed on drives in this year's playoff series, both against the Clippers and the Oklahoma City Thunder. Luka leads all playoff leaders in fouls committed in the clutch and leads his team in overall fouls committed overall. He had the lowest defensive rating in the clutch in this playoffs run, period. And look, I get some of these numbers are a bit skewed because of his usage, especially in the fourth quarter and clutch situations, but it's telling that most of the Celtics half-court offense in this finals was primarily focused on going at Luka Doncic on as many possessions as possible, forcing switches to create one-on-one isolation plays where Luka is defending the ball handler. And of course, you don't need stats that a simple eye test can't give you to show why Luka was a disaster in defense, and the Celtics clearly targeting him on every possession to exploit his defensive deficiencies. Now, the bad defense aside in this series, what actually bothered me more about Luka in this one was his incessant complaining and foul baiting. One thing that drives me insane in watching my own team, the Chicago Bulls, and one of my biggest issues I have with Zach LaVine, is the frequency for which he barks the refs after what he thinks is a foul, but really was just a bad play on his part, and doesn't hustle back on defense, and the opposing team scores on the ensuing possession while he's jogging back, still looking at the ref for a foul to be called. There was nothing more frustrating for a fan to see your star player constantly griping about calls and leaving your teammates out to dry because you're more focused on getting your point across than getting back on D. Or on the other side, playing poor defense and reaching in because you got beat and then complaining after you've been called for an obvious foul like it's somehow the ref's fault. And look, officiating in the NBA can be pretty lousy at times. In fact, I would argue NBA officiating has slowly gotten worse over the years, and I won't deny that some of the officiating in the finals wasn't the best, with some very questionable calls at times. But when some of the worst defenders in the league end up being the biggest complainers of fouls being called against them, always believing they were just making a play at the ball, that should tell you they're just looking to get bailed out for their bad defensive effort. Sometimes the refs make a bad call. It's not always their fault though. And for someone like Luka, it's getting to the point where it's always the ref's fault. And then he turns that anger towards his bench for not challenging an obvious foul call. If you're getting hit with fouls when a team is constantly targeting you on defense and you're looking up at your bench demanding a challenge, the problem probably isn't the refs or the coaching staff. That's a you problem. And look, even when the refs make a bad call, because they will miss calls throughout a given game, it's going to happen. You have to keep playing. Not every call is going to go your way. Focus on the game, get back on D, stay mentally tough, don't let the calls affect your play. And yes, I know that's easier said than done for anyone who has played organized basketball in some fashion. I'm sure has had their fair share of frustration with the officiating. But to be the best in the league, to be playing at the highest level, you have to be locked in and focused on every aspect of the game, which includes letting calls go and not leaving your team out to dry while you're in the ref's ear in the middle of a play. Here's the thing, as great as Luka is, and he'll continue to get better and could be the best player in the NBA in just a few short years, he still has a lot of growing up to do if he wants to get to that next level, taking more accountability for his play, owning up to his mistakes, and not trying to point the finger at everyone else. That's what's separating himself from being an all-time great. That said, I do think Luka will get there. I do think he'll use this finals showing as a learning experience for him, and with age, time, proper coaching, he will mature into the superstar that the Dallas Mavericks need him to be. If not though, and Luka refuses to accept any kind of role on defense and continues to whine and complain when things don't go his way, I have a hard time seeing him ever winning an NBA championship. I would love to hear what you guys think though. Let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.